I just pulled the lamb out of the oven when the doorbell rang. The timing was awful. My guests were already seated, wine was flowing, and Senator Haverson was mid-story about a shady zoning bill he was trying to shut down. The man didn't do small talk, and this dinner was my shot to get him on board with a local anti-HOA reform initiative I'd been quietly working on. I wiped my hands on a towel and jogged to the front door, already regretting not ignoring it. There, standing like a crow in a thunderstorm, was Karen Whitmore, vice president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, self-proclaimed enforcer of everything from mailbox paint tones to acceptable lawn gnome quantities. She didn't wait for an invite, she just stormed in. "Darren." "This is unacceptable," she barked, high heels clicking on my hardwood like gunshots. "We received a complaint about street parking violations. There are 6 SIX cars parallel parked in front of your house." I blinked. "It's a dinner party, Karen. I don't care if it's the second coming. This is a direct violation of subsection 12 of the parking code." Behind me, I heard chairs scraping. I turned just as Senator Haverson, in his signature gray blazer and unimpressed expression, stepped into the foyer holding his wine glass and raising an eyebrow. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, "but you just barged into a private residence. Do you make a habit of trespassing uninvited?" Karen's face paled for a second, but she pushed on like a train without brakes. "This is HOA business. I have every right. You, whoever you are, should know that this neighborhood has rules." I stepped in before she could make it worse. "Karen, this is Senator Haverson. He's our guest tonight." She blinked. "Senator of what?" "United States Senate," he replied dryly. "And I'm currently discussing federal-level housing policy with Darren here. You've interrupted a meeting of public interest." Karen's lips tightened into a line you could slice cheese with. "Well, I don't care who he is. Rules are rules. And if Darren thinks he can flaunt them by hosting political meetings, he's mistaken." I was about to respond when the senator chuckled. "I'm curious," he said, turning to me. "How exactly does your HOA define its enforcement capabilities?" "Because this lady just violated 3 state statutes on private property rights." Karen's jaw twitched. "I'm simply doing my duty." "No," I said, stepping closer, "you're harassing homeowners under the guise of authority. And now you've made a mistake." From the living room, my friend Kaylee Anderson, an attorney who's been helping me draft legislation, appeared, phone in hand. "I recorded everything," she said calmly. "And Senator, we've been building a case against this HOA for months." Karen's eyes darted between us. "You people are out of line." "No, Karen," I said, shutting the door behind her. "You are." She didn't know it yet, but her little tantrum just gave us the final piece we needed. Senator Haverson didn't even wait for the door to click shut behind Karen before turning to Kaylee. "You said you've been compiling a case," he said, gesturing for her to follow him back toward the dining room. "I'd like to see what you've got." Kaylee nodded and followed, tapping on her phone as she walked. I trailed after them, passing the tray of roasted lamb on the counter, which now felt like it belonged in another dimension. My guests had gone quiet, watching the chaos unfold like they were ringside at a prize fight. "I'll bring up the documents," Kaylee said, sliding into the chair beside the senator and setting her phone face up on the table. "We've compiled over 100 pages of correspondence, screenshots, and recorded interactions, some of which show clear overreach. But what just happened tonight? It crosses into criminal trespass, possibly unlawful surveillance too." "Surveillance?" Haverson looked up sharply. "Explain." I stepped in. "It started last month. A few neighbors noticed unfamiliar vehicles parked in front of their homes, same make, same plates, different times of day, always idling. Turns out the HOA hired a private investigator to monitor compliance. They never disclosed it to residents. One of the cars had a dash cam aimed directly at my property for over a week." The senator's expression hardened. "That's a civil violation at minimum. Depending on what they recorded, it could violate state wiretapping laws." "Did you recover the footage?" Kaylee pulled open a folder on her phone and tapped a few times. We did better. One of our neighbors, a retired postal inspector, confronted the investigator and got him to admit he was hired by Karen and the HOA board president, Mark Reddick. We have audio of the whole conversation. He gave up everything once he realized he might be complicit. Haverson leaned back in his chair, glass forgotten. You've got enough here for a formal complaint to the State Housing Authority. And if what you're saying is accurate, you may be looking at a criminal conspiracy under the state's abuse of office statute. Kaylee glanced at me. We were originally building a civil case for overreach selective enforcement, fraudulent fines, that kind of thing. But with tonight's incident and the surveillance, it may be time to escalate. Senator Haverson nodded slowly, folding his hands together. How many homeowners have been impacted by this? I took a deep breath. At least 30, probably more. The problem is people are scared. Karen and Reddick have been issuing bogus violations, fining people over vague infractions like improper holiday decor or non-uniform shrub height. When folks push back, they get targeted. I mean, one guy had his lawn dug up by accident during a so-called irrigation repair. Kaylee added, we think they're trying to force out longtime residents and flip the homes. There's a pattern. They fine people into submission, get them to sell, then recommend buyers from a specific real estate group. Reddick's cousin owns it. That got the senator's full attention. Now that's interesting. If there's a financial relationship between the board and a real estate firm, and they're using their positions to manipulate home sales, that's fraud. Possibly racketeering. A knock at the door interrupted the conversation. I exchanged a look with Kaylee. You expecting anyone? She shook her head. I walked to the door and opened it cautiously. It was Miguel Ortega, my next-door neighbor, a quiet man in his 60s who rarely left his workshop. Sorry to bother you, he said, holding up a flash drive. But I figured you'd want this. I stepped aside to let him in. What is it? I installed a camera last month after someone dumped herbicide along my fence line. I didn't tell anyone, but tonight I caught Karen pulling up just before she barged in. She was on the phone with someone, she said. He won't be so smug once we hit him with the special assessment. Thought you'd want to hear it. Kaylee reached for the drive. Do you mind if we copy this? Do what you need to, Miguel said. I'm tired of them treating us like tenants instead of homeowners. He nodded to the senator, then quietly left. Haverson looked at me. Special assessment, I sighed. Another of their tricks. They can't raise dues without a vote, but they've started issuing emergency assessments for made-up repairs. Like a non-existent sinkhole repair on Maple Drive. No permits, no work done, just an invoice and a due date, and if you don't pay, they lien your house. Haverson turned to Kaylee. You have everything documented, she nodded. Receipts, board meeting transcripts, bank deposit records, they're sloppy. Then I'll make some calls tomorrow, he said. State Attorney's Office, Division of Licensing, possibly the IRS. Kaylee's eyes narrowed. Why the IRS? If they're collecting funds under false pretenses and personally benefiting, that's taxable income. If they're hiding it, that's a federal crime. I finally sat down, my appetite long gone. The lamb was still warm, but the air in the room had shifted. There was no more guessing, no more suspicion. We had confirmation, and now we had momentum. Senator Haverson tapped the table. I want a formal meeting with your affected neighbors tomorrow evening. My staff will be here to take statements. We'll also bring someone from the State Housing Oversight Committee. Kaylee was already scrolling through her contacts. I'll make the calls tonight. Haverson turned to me. You've got a community worth fighting for, but you'll need to stay sharp. These people don't play fair. I've noticed. I mean it, he said. If they catch wind of this, they'll try to cover their tracks. You need to secure every document, every recording, every witness statement tonight. I can do that. Don't just do it. Make duplicates. Store them in multiple locations. Assume they'll try to tamper with something. I nodded, then stood. Kaylee, can you coordinate with the others? I'll start scanning. She was already dialing. As I walked toward my office, I paused to glance out the window. Karen's SUV was gone, but the street still held the residue of her intrusion. I knew she wasn't done. People like her didn't back down, they doubled down. But this time, we weren't just playing defense, we were building a case, and she'd just handed us the crowbar. By the time the last guest left just after midnight, the house was running on quiet adrenaline. I'd made 3 copies of everything: video files, statements, bank records, and stored them on separate encrypted drives. One went into my fireproof safe. Another I handed to Kaylee to keep at her office. The third I left with Senator Haverson's aide, who'd promised to run it through legal counsel first thing in the morning. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew what was coming. At exactly 8:42 the next morning, while I was sipping coffee and watching the backyard sprinklers kick on, my camera alert pinged. A white pickup truck with no branding crept down the street and stopped directly in front of my mailbox. The driver, a thin man in reflective safety gear, stepped out, walked to the front of the box, and held up a measuring tape. I watched as he jotted something on a clipboard, glanced around, then drove off. Kaylee called 2 minutes later. "Guess who's now under mailbox height inspection?" I laughed dryly. "Let me guess, it's not the senator. They're testing you. Trying to provoke a reaction. They're going to get one." Within the hour, I was downtown, seated inside a private conference room at the Office of State Housing Oversight. Senator Haverson's team had pulled strings and cleared the schedule. They brought in 2 compliance auditors, a retired judge who now served on the Ethics Review Board, and a clerk from the Attorney General's office. Kaylee arrived with Miguel and 4 other homeowners, each carrying thick folders and tired expressions. None of us wore suits. We didn't need to. The evidence was doing all the talking now. The lead auditor, Frances DeWitt, tapped her pen on the stack of documents in front of her. "What you've shown us is not simply mismanagement. It is systemic abuse of legal authority for personal enrichment. If verified, this would constitute criminal fraud, conspiracy, and based on the misappropriation of funds, possibly embezzlement." "How was this allowed to continue without challenge?" Miguel leaned forward. "Most of us didn't know the rules ourselves. They exploited that. And when we asked questions, they buried us in paperwork, threats, liens. We thought we were alone." Kaylee added, "The HOA's own bylaws were amended unilaterally by the president without a vote. That's where the special assessment clause came from. We found the original version on the county clerk's archive. It doesn't match the one they sent homeowners." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You're saying they falsified corporate governance documents?" "Not just that," I said. "They retroactively altered meeting minutes to show approvals that never happened. We checked timestamps on the PDFs created weeks after the so-called meetings. That got the clerk's attention. That's document fraud. If they submitted those to any state agency, that's a felony." "They did," Kaylee replied. "We pulled their most recent annual filing. Same language, same fabricated minutes." Frances folded her hands. "This committee will recommend an immediate audit, but I'll be honest, this is beyond our office. I'm contacting the district attorney." By that evening, things began to move fast. A plainclothes detective from the Financial Crimes Unit arrived at my house just after dusk, asking for a copy of the flash drive Miguel had delivered. I gave it to him, along with a printed list of homeowners willing to testify. He thanked me, then quietly informed me that the district attorney had already approved a motion to subpoena the HOA's financial records and was preparing to freeze their operating account pending investigation. At dawn the next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with activity. A pair of uniformed officers stood at the entrance to the HOA's clubhouse, blue tape stretched across the doorway. 2 unmarked sedans idled nearby while a woman in a gray blazer spoke into a radio. I stood at the edge of my driveway, coffee in hand, as Mark Reddick, the HOA president, stormed out of the building with a red face and a stack of papers clutched in his arms. "This is harassment," he shouted. You have no right to seize private property, the woman held up her badge. We have a court order. Step aside, Mr. Reddick. Karen appeared moments later, hair still damp and phone pressed to her ear. She spotted me and marched across the street. You think you've won? She hissed. You've just dragged this entire neighborhood into a mess over your little vendetta. I didn't answer her right away. I let the silence stretch as I watched the officers remove a desktop computer tower from the clubhouse. I didn't drag anyone, I said finally. You did. When you decided the rules didn't apply to you. You have no idea what kind of power we have. And yet here you are, I said, nodding toward the officers, powerless. She took a step forward, then froze as another car pulled up a black Crown Vic with government plates. Senator Haverson stepped out, flanked by a pair of aides. He didn't even look at her as he crossed the street. Morning, he said to me. You ready? For what? He pulled a sheet of paper from his coat. Press wants a statement. We're holding a public forum at the community center. The state's housing committee has authorized a temporary oversight panel run by the homeowners themselves. You're on it. I blinked. You're serious? Dead serious. We're not just cleaning this up, we're changing the law. And we need people who have lived it. Karen's expression cracked for the first time, confusion replacing outrage. What's happening? She demanded. Senator Haverson turned to her, eyes hard. You're under investigation, you and your board. And if the forensic accountants find what we think they will, you'll be facing charges before the month is out. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Haverson turned back to me. Let's go. The town hall was packed, not with politicians or press, but with neighbors. People who'd been fined, bullied, ignored. They stood shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, jaws set. This wasn't about a dinner party anymore. This was about dignity. Kaylee took the podium first and outlined the timeline of abuses, ending with a sharp reminder. These positions are not kingdoms. They're stewardship, and when stewards betray their trust, they answer to the people. Then Haverson spoke, announcing a new state bill aimed at curbing unchecked HOA authority, mandating annual audits and outlawing secret assessments without a supermajority vote. The crowd erupted in applause. When it was my turn, I stepped up, heart pounding. I didn't want this fight, I said. None of us did, but when someone abuses power and the people stay silent, abuse becomes the norm. We're not silent anymore. Afterward, a woman named Grace, who'd lived 2 doors down for over 20 years, walked up with tears in her eyes. I thought I was going to lose my home, she said quietly. They told me I owed $6,000 for tree damage that never happened. But I didn't know what to do. I thought they could take it from me. Not anymore, I said. She nodded and hugged me. Outside, the HOA sign had been taken down. The clubhouse would be repurposed for public use. A new board would be elected within 60 days, one with oversight, term limits, and transparency. And Karen, she was nowhere to be seen. I didn't need to watch her fall. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about every neighbor who'd been made to feel powerless finally realizing they weren't. They never had been. The new interim oversight panel met for the first time the following Thursday, inside the repurposed HOA clubhouse, now stripped of its framed bylaws and smug motivational posters. Folding chairs replaced the leather ones Karen and Reddick had custom ordered with HOA funds. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I sat at the head of the table, not because I asked to, but because the neighbors insisted. Kaylee sat beside me, already thumbing through the first financial summary delivered by the forensic accountant the DA had brought in. The numbers were worse than expected. Not just misused funds, whole payments had vanished. I'm seeing multiple transfers to a shell company registered to a P.O. box in Tallahassee, Kaylee said, flipping the page. It's listed under a James Reddick. Mark's brother. Didn't even bother hiding the last name, said Miguel, squinting at the document. Amateurs, Kaylee tapped the table. They were sloppy because they thought nobody would ever check. The real question now is how far up does this go? We didn't have to wait long to find out. Detective Lanier, the financial crimes officer who'd been quietly working since the investigation began, entered the room unannounced. He didn't ask for permission. He simply dropped a small hard case on the table and opened it, revealing several flash drives and a handheld audio recorder. "We executed a search of Reddick's office this morning," he said. "Found these hidden under a false drawer panel." He pressed play on the recorder. A static pop crackled, then a voice Reddick's came through, muttering about sliding the assessments through before the quarterly audit and Karen's job to keep the loud ones distracted. Kaylee leaned forward. "He recorded himself?" "No," said Lanier. "His assistant did. She came to us last week. Said she was tired of being threatened with non-disclosure fines, whatever that means." I glanced at Kaylee. "That's not even a real thing." "It is if you make someone believe it is," Lanier continued. "You'll want to hear this next part." He skipped forward. Reddick's voice again, this time lower, sharper. "If we get the buyout done before the new year, the firm cuts us 20% each. That's nearly $100,000 just on the Maple cluster, but we've got to keep the current owners miserable enough to walk." Kaylee's jaw tightened. "That's not just unethical. That's coordinated displacement with financial incentive. That's predatory fraud." Lanier nodded slowly. "Which is why, as of this morning, both Reddick and Karen have been charged with wire fraud, falsification of corporate documents, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. We're adding elder abuse enhancements for at least 5 homeowners who were over 70 and targeted with illegal assessments." A long silence followed. Grace, who had sat quietly until now, folded her hands. "Are they in jail?" Reddick's in holding. "Karen tried to leave the county, but we intercepted her 20 miles outside the district. She's under house arrest pending arraignment." Miguel let out a low whistle. "And here I was worried about getting cited for my bird bath." Lanier packed up the case, then turned to me. "We'll keep you updated, but I'd recommend reviewing any upcoming elections. You've got a clean slate now, don't let another crew fill it while you're still cleaning up." He left, and the room sat still for a moment. Kaylee finally broke the silence. "We need a full review of every bylaw, every procedural tool they use to control residents. We dismantle those tricks so no future board can exploit them. We already passed a motion to block emergency assessments without a 75% resident approval," I said. "Let's follow it with public budget disclosures and quarterly independent audits." Several neighbors nodded. Grace raised her hand. "Can we include a rule that board members can't have business ties to any service providers?" "Absolutely," Kaylee said. "Conflict of interest clauses are standard." The fact that we didn't already have one is part of the problem. We worked late into the evening. By the time we adjourned, we had a 10-point reform plan and a date set for the first open election in over a decade. Word spread fast. That weekend, someone painted over the HOA sign at the neighborhood entrance with bright blue letters that read, "Welcome to Willow Creek, now owned by its people." I won't say everything changed overnight, but something fundamental shifted. 2 weeks later, the DA's office released a public statement outlining the charges against Reddick and Karen. The shockwave hit every HOA in the county. Local news ran segments for days, using our case as a warning about unchecked power in private governance. One morning, Senator Haverson called. "They're talking about naming part of the housing reform bill after your neighborhood," he said. "Willow Creek Act," he laughed. "Too poetic, but you've started something. Counties from across the state are asking for the language. You might see this go national. I didn't do it alone, I know, but you did something most people don't. You didn't look away." The following month, we held the special election. For the first time in years, the ballots weren't mailed in secret or walked door to door by board members with clipboards. We used a secure third-party service funded by a voluntary community fundraiser that hit its goal in under 2 days. No intimidation, no threats, just votes. When the results came in, not a single former board member or their allies made it onto the new panel. Instead, residents elected a mix of retirees, young couples, and small business owners. People who'd lived in the neighborhood for years without ever being heard. People who knew what it meant to be ignored. At the first meeting of the new board, Kaylee stood and introduced a motion to rename the clubhouse. I propose we dedicate this space to the residents of Willow Creek past, present, and future and name it the Haverson Hall for Civic Integrity. The motion passed unanimously. We held a small ceremony. Senator Haverson came in person. No press, no speeches, just a simple plaque and a room full of people who finally had a say. Afterward, I stood on the clubhouse steps, watching kids play in the grass outside. Grace sat beside the new community garden, talking with a neighbor she'd never spoken to before. Miguel had built a handmade bench and installed it himself, complete with a small metal sign that read, "For anyone who needs a moment." Kaylee joined me, arms crossed. "Think they'll try to come back?" she asked. "If they do, they won't recognize this place. It's not theirs anymore." She nodded. "We should start drafting a citizens' HOA guide, something people in other neighborhoods can use." I grinned. "Already halfway done. Working title, How to Defang a Paper Tyrant." She shook her head. "You really can't help yourself." "Nope." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the lawn. For the first time in a long while, they didn't feel ominous, they felt earned. We hadn't just reclaimed a neighborhood, we'd rewritten its story.